even though he's just in the chat, but he's saying nice things. Hello, everybody. We're kicking off an exciting episode talking about Qwik beta and what we have going on. You may have seen some really cool things that are in development we could talk about. They've kind of evolved over time. Path to V1, what even happened with beta? What does beta even mean for us? Maybe you didn't read our blog post. We'll catch you up on everything right now. Anybody joining in, please just throw in the chat like who you are, hello, where you're tuning in from. We just like to know, and we really want to know your questions because we can talk about a million things related to Qwik forever. But it's way more exciting if we talk about the things that matter to you. So, with all that said, we want to kick off and start talking about the Qwik beta. We're excited to share a whole bunch of different things regarding this. But why don't we just start with Mishko? Do you want to just kick us off with what beta means, what actually came? Then we can maybe transition to Manu to talk about the framework and Adam talk about Qwik City, all the fun things.
Yeah. So to us, beta means a couple of things. One is that we think it's production ready in a sense that we're not aware of any huge bugs that would prevent somebody from going to production. Now, not preventing from production is not the same thing as not having bugs, right? So, you know how software always has bugs? There's no such thing as bug-free software. So we're not saying that it's bug-free. We're saying that we're not aware of any big issues that would prevent you from going to production. The other thing we are saying is that as of beta, we are planning to make no more breaking changes, or other, future is uncertain. And if there is going to be something that we have to change, we'll make sure that it's in backwards compatible way. But as far as we can tell, all the pieces that we wanted to do, we have included inside of the beta, and we don't see any reason why we should be breaking any of these things. So I think those are the big milestones for us that make something a beta.
I remember some days before the beta, I kind of had the point like getting to betas where you can make sure that it will not suck the release. Like it's going more or less the happy path is good, right? Maybe for other things it's going to fall apart, but at least the very happy path is going to work great. Right? And it was, I think we are there definitely.
So maybe it's a good time to talk about sort of what features made it into the beta and sort of what features do we have coming. I know we really want to talk about signals. We're excited about signals. We also have Qwik City, if we forgot to mention now, is also in beta. So that's kind of a recommended starting point, and we're quite happy with it, though it truly is a thin layer over Qwik. So if you want to roll your own, if you don't like some common conventions like file-based routing, you don't have to, but it certainly does make it easy. Why don't we, I saw Adam unmuted. So Adam, why don't you just jump in and tell us a little bit about the Qwik City side or whatever else you'd like to add?
So kind of same thing with Qwik City beta is that we're really happy with like the majority of the features. We think that they're in, I think that a lot of what features we want in a meta framework are on par with what Next.js and Gatsby and all of them can do. That said, it's still in beta. There's I think the biggest thing that needs a little bit more time is our link component. We focused mostly on making sure that MPA works great, multiple page application that you can SSR the page, that you can, do static site generation, SSG the page, or the whole site, everything like there works great. But then when it becomes a client side transition between page A and B, while linked component works fine right now, I think there's a lot of room for improvement for us to work on internally. And so link works just fine now, but I think it can get a heck of a lot better, especially after Manu's signals hits main, that there's really going to be very, very little JavaScript that's going to be required for that single page navigation transition. So that's one area that I would say is on there to clean up. And then let's see, as far as that, I think the other thing with Qwik City is probably making sure like the endpoint and the request handling stuff is nailed down. We have that correct. Like if you wanted to authenticate anything underneath this layout or underneath this directory, that make sure the authentication works correctly. It's not to say it doesn't work. It's just that we really kind of haven't documented the patterns and make sure that everything works correctly. So I think that's kind of where we're at with Qwik City.
We've also got the active prefetching, and we went into more detail before, right? But the fact that we're not letting the browser kind of guess, we're not hinting to the browser to prefetch. We're actually managing that directly with a service worker and being very smart. And we're even doing analytics-driven prefetching, like smart what to prefetch based on its usage in real production. You want to tell us a tiny bit about that?
Yeah, active prefetching is a lot of fun. So we're calling it active prefetching because it's not just like traditionally a site would just, these are all the things you're probably going to need. Download all of it as fast as you can. We don't want to do that. Like that kind of goes against our whole point of Qwik. We want to make sure we just download what you need. And so with active prefetching, we have a manifest of everything that's possible. All of the symbols that you could have, all the different entry points you could get into. And with that manifest, we're able to understand like, well, this page has this one click handler on it. Why don't we go prefetch that right now? But the rest of the page doesn't have any rendering. You're not going to need anything. Like there's no way to re-render this component. There's no need to do any of this stuff. And so the prefetcher is able to say like, oh, well, I just need this one thing. And again, this isn't after you've downloaded and rendered the whole application. This is the very first thing that happens after the HTML is parsed and rendered, is that the very first thing it's going to do is like, okay, let's just get this 1 kilobyte file that you might be able to click. It is a possibility of clicking. And so it prefetches that. And then beyond that, it's not just that it uses the link rel preload, which is what a lot of other frameworks use and really is not widely supported, considering it doesn't work on Safari and iOS, iPad. But we're using the cache API, which is actually often associated with service workers, but it's actually available in both the main thread and the worker thread. And so with the cache API, we're able to have a lot of control of the cache. Of like, we can, every time that you want to have it do a request or something, our cache can say like, oh, we've already cached that, don't bother ever again, right? And so we can keep that stuff for immutable stuff for forever. So if you download it once, it's now within the actual web browser's cache API that we can then keep track of it. Like, we never need to download this again, we've already gotten it. So then by the time that Qwik actually accesses it, Qwik is able to just, it's going to do a normal dynamic import, and it's going to be as fast as it possibly can be because it's all going to be locally handled there. So, and again, like the active prefetching thing is, it's actively prefetching as it's going along. So like if you open up a modal and the modal now has a couple different ways that you could interact with the app, those things then become prefetched, and it continues that way rather than again downloading a megabyte of the application of every single possibility. And then when you do another build in the next hour where we change like fix a spelling mistake or something like that, we don't clear the entire cache because really there's only one thing that could have changed. Everything else that you've already prefetched is still sitting in the cache, and we didn't empty that out. So I think that's another big difference too, is that we're making sure that if you downloaded it once and it's a hashed file, they're going to hold on to that while it's still a possibility within your application. And so all those things combined, and also like reducing the network waterfalls, where like because we know the manifest, because we know that module A imports module B and B imports module C, that the moment the user starts downloading module A, immediately we're like, oh, well, we know that once A is done downloading, it's going to try to get B. And we know that once B is done downloading, it's going to try to get C. So immediately when Qwik City sees that A has been requested, it's like, oh, you're going to need these other two. So let's just kick those off too. So when you look at the network graph, you can see how like there is no more waterfall of these things if you were to request 3 things at a time. So it's also kind of fun to.
I think that's very interesting because we started with prefetching, doing a lot of experimentation, right? I remember the Prefetching API, we have like 5 different implementation of how it could happen. It could happen with links, module preload, with a worker, and then we kind of find out that the service worker is the thing that is more reliable. And I think that's the difference between other frameworks, which is like a hint. It's actually described as a hint. But for Qwik, it's more like fundamental. This needs to kind of work, right? It's not like up to you to download it. No, really like, yes, go and get it. And the other thing is that the same logic that does the prefetching that's exactly what Adam said. That's the waterfall. It solves the waterfall problem, right? So the service worker is kind of smart, right? That's kind of also the difference, right? The service worker knows about the dependency graph. So when you get one, even if it was never prefetched before, we already know that this is going to require all these other things. So the service worker will prefetch at the same time. I think that's a very interesting usage of service workers, which is to solve the waterfall problem.
Yeah, and lastly, like the service worker itself is a web worker, right? And web worker is in a different thread. So all of this is happening off the main thread in a background task, which I think is also pretty cool.
Yeah, and it's funny because, one of the metaphors we like is this is like, video buffering, right? And on one extreme, there's downloading entire video before you can play it. That's how a lot of pages on a typical, say, React application will work. You're going to need to get that whole page. Now you can interact and everything inside it, or many, many of those things. On the other extreme, we show demos of only requesting things as needed. It's an interesting demo to show. You click and things are fetched. But the reality is, just like a video stream, we want to be buffering the things in advance. But what's cool about it, well, 2 funny things. One is for video buffering, you don't want to just hint, like you want the buffer. You have to have the buffer. So our service worker solves that. It has to be there. It's critical to the framework and the application. Second, though, is videos are a linear thing. Navigating through an application is a non-linear thing. And so that's what we think is really interesting and exciting. We do a bunch of interesting heuristics now, but there's a very clean API for feeding data in to know and decide from the behavior of people using your website. And there was a lot of, in fact, Adam, you were telling me about this last night. It might be a good one to touch on too. There was a lot of consideration in these sort of keys for the symbols or the hashes for the symbols so that they be very stable, meaning your application could be changing. Like say you're using Builder to rearrange and change pages all the time, you're publishing all the time, but we still want that data about how users navigate through your application to still kind of continue to inform the prefetching, the optimal prefetching priorities, such as the add to cart button or the search bar. People frequently use stuff like that across iterations and deployments and updates to the content. I'd love to have you share and remind me a little bit how that works. It's pretty neat.
Yeah, and really Manu did most of this work in the compiler where it's able to, what we call a symbol. So a symbol could be the render function, it could be an event handler. And so with these symbols, we want to have that, like, as Manu would say, as stable, whereas like you can change the content of it, but we're still talking about the same symbol. So like on day one, you have an event handler that does something special. And so you cache that information, you request it, and then day two, you kind of make the change to the content. But we still want to know that symbol ABC is the same one, so that when we're able to, when we want to prefetch and we want to like better bundle these components together, we're able to say like, actually, symbol ABC is always used, so let's prefetch that one first. And so it kind of, traditionally people think of like a hash content or a hash, JavaScript is like, it's the bundle file name and it's hashed, so therefore it can be request, it's immutable and can have a forever cache header. We do that also, but we kind of break it out in two different parts where bundling is a separate process, where symbols is like basically talking about a specific source of the component or a event listener component like that. And then with this information of like symbol ABC is always used with symbol XYZ, then let's bundle them together, which creates the hash of whatever it could be. And then that gets prefetched of the hash. But by keeping these symbol names stable, we're able to pretty much further optimize, after each secondary build. And I think, Manu, you want to talk about like the next big thing of how we're going to be able to take the symbols and the tool that we're going to be building with that?
Should I jump to screen share? I did it preemptively. Is this a good time, Manu? You're on mute.
I'm mute. Okay, now I'm mute. So we're talking about actually in the doc side, if you open it, we have this kind of enable. We are not collecting this information about the symbols, but we have already kind of the logs. So you can see this happening. Even if you open Qwik builder.io and you click, for example, some interaction like this one, we'll see these two.
Can you make the font bigger?
Yeah, yes. We printed, I'm going to refresh. So I'm going to refresh. I'm going to interact with this button. So you happen here like two logs and it's two symbols. So my intuition tells me that the first symbol is probably the click handler, right? I can actually search for it. Yeah, it's going to be a bit tough to find what it is, but pretty sure this symbol is the actual click. And the other one will probably be the one that renders the menu. But you can do more interesting things. So imagine you actually have a lot of interaction. You have a buy button, if it's e-commerce, or I don't know, I'm going to open the playground. So in the playground, there is a lot of stuff happening, right? So what we can do with this information is not only feed this to the service worker active prefetcher, but we can take this information at the optimizer level and say, look, actually these symbols that initially are in different files bundled differently, we can say actually, look, all these kind of symbols should be together. And I think the most fascinating idea is that this is not reflected in the code. We are doing data-driven bundling, right? It's not that you developer are going to add imports here or there to change how the code is bundled, but you actually run the code, you actually run your application with real traffic data. and you can actually run like statistics analysis of this. We already have some ideas of how we can solve this, and rebundle your application. At the same time, give this information to the active prefetcher that Adam talked about, to really get to the perfect web, right? It's kind of like that will be yes, remove this. To the perfect bundling, right? Like, because at the end of the day, like how you bundle things also depends on how the user is going to interact with it, right? And that's part of the equation, I guess.
Yeah, and I think the point really is like this is all just part of how Qwik works. Like the lowest level is able to split it apart into symbols, and with this information, with real user traffic, you can decide, or the whole system can decide. Actually, we saw the ABC and XYZ are used all the time. Let's turn them into the same request, and let's make that the very first thing to request. Whereas we see that whatever 1, 2, 3 is never used. It's rarely ever requested. Let's not even prefetch it, so that's all the stuff that we can do automatically. And I think, Mishko, you had that idea just
I was
recently.
just about to say that the crazy idea I had last night was just about every website has Google Analytics, right? And so why don't you just, and Google Analytics already knows how to listen to custom events and record it. So Google Analytics just needs to be configured to listen to these events. And you get statistical information like this is the symbols that are actually used in your application. And so if we can somehow figure out a way of exporting that information into the build system, then you will have essentially the ultimate AI-driven bundling system. Sorry, AI is just a fancy name for statistics, right?
Yeah, and I think what's cool about that is, again, it'd be automatic, but for the doc site, there's really not that much interactivity. There's really not much going on. So we've got just a small, it would make the menu go faster. But if you think of something like Photoshop, it's something that's got many different paths that you could interact with next. And then you've got, however many users that are using this web app, we can decide, actually, they all use this one first, or they all these are all the common things to get. So let's bundle these 20 symbols and make a 10 kilobyte file, right? We can have all this, actually it's best to optimize them to make them 30 kilobyte files. We can make all these decisions on just this data of how the apps are being used. And so really, again, it's not having to have a developer well, I need to optimize and I need to dynamically and import here, I need to lazy load this instead. It's just part of how Qwik builds. And with user generated data, I don't know how you can get much better in that at that point.
I think
I was just going to say that I'm super excited about the fact that Google Analytics allows you to slice and dice the data and create charts and all kinds of things, right? And you all of a sudden just get this information kind of for free on your bundles, right? So you have insight immediately, not just about how do people navigate through your pages, but also what symbols are being used and why maybe certain people are seeing a slower responses or something like that. It's because these symbols aren't being pre-cached correctly or something like that. And so you get a lot of insight into what's going on.
I think the most exciting thing is that we are thinking about these problems. I think we are not thinking about how we make the VDOM. I mean, we also kind of do that, but we are not focused on how we make this 5% milliseconds faster. I think the problems we are trying to solve is for the Adobe Photoshop, right? It's not like they're going to use it right now, but kind of what Qwik tries to solve is this big application or complex websites, complex e-commerce with a lot of stuff. It's not Hello World, a small widget, right? We are not making Qwik for small widgets. I think that's exciting. I want to say that I don't know if you're sharing my screen right now, but in any application, in any Qwik application right now, the way to capture this information and wire up, Mishko said that you can send it to Google Analytics. I haven't looked into the API, but you can do whatever, right? You can send it to BigQuery. The way to get this information is to just have a add event listener, use symbol, and you will get that information, right? And when it happens, right? So you just collect it with the timestamp, and that will be it, right? And then you just build on top of this. I wanted to share that.
Yeah, you know what's funny here too? Oops, there we go. What's funny here too is I was the biggest skeptic of this, as this team knows, because like it's one thing like, yes, this theoretical dream could be true, and I was like, yeah, is it simple? It's gonna be easy. It's gonna be cost effective. As it makes sense resources direction. And I've been incredibly surprised. Like this is really clean and elegant, and plugging in things is actually extremely straightforward, and it works shockingly well. For some reason, when I hear it abstractly, I think it must be complicated, and it's actually not, which is the coolest, most surprising part to me. And also mentioning sort of Google Analytics, BigQuery, etc. That was my other concerns, the cost and how it's done. But I was talking to Minko from the Angular team a couple weekends ago about how he wrote Guest.js, and it's perfect. The exact strategy Guest.js uses for the link prefetching sort of prioritization based on Google Analytics data, 100% could plug into Qwik symbols extremely elegantly. So that's like, there's a lot of interesting potential here, and I think a lot of people want to talk, so I'll mute myself.
Yeah, I just wanted to recap that, Google Analytics kind of solved the big data problem, like rather than having to have a big database to collect of how users. So that kind of solves the problem there. But what's also exciting about is like, this all sounds like, oh, this is gonna be hard to set up. But no, I mean, this is really gonna be like a Vite plugin where, when you deploy it to Vercel or to Cloudflare, when it builds there, it's able to dynamically go to the API, create this JSON object, which our build tool needs, and then our build tool will be like, oh, it looks like all these guys are used together. Let's make them one bundle, one 10 kilobyte bundle. And like, oh, this is the second most important. Let's make that one 20 kilobyte bundle. So it can all be basically automated. We're just explaining how it works under the hood.
Right. Like we are already in the docs actually doing these optimizations manually, which is kind of like, if you go to the byte config, you cannot see that there is like a manually erase of symbols, but that's not what developers will have to do, right? We are just experimenting with it. And we saw like this massive thing. I remember like before beta, there was like the search button that for some reason it caused like a cascade of things, because the button will actually render, but when you click, you render like the whole Argolia thing, and we'll render like a lot of stuff. And that was like a lot of things to download that the pre-caching didn't work. And it was solved by, kind of running this in the console, doing a copy, putting it in there, and just like format, like putting the quotes around and making an array, and the performance issue was solved, right? And so the kind of, we have the proof there that this actually has a positive. Now the next step is how to be optimized, automated, right?
Yeah, what Manu is describing is like, really, there's no way for the compiler to know how everything is actually being used. I mean, we can take, it can take pretty good guesses of like, these are things that can be put together, but it took an actual user interaction to see like, well, this is what Algolia opened this up with this click listener, then it added these things and added these things. And so that's why we're really more set on like getting the user-driven data. So then when we bundle it, we're like, yep, let's put all of these guys together, make a tiny file out of them. So when there's no need for prefetching, because they're all sitting inside of the same bundle.
And I want to say that I think it's the optimizer can always get smarter and do like a better baseline, which is something that probably will happen through time. But I think at some point you actually want to actually do real user, right? Because the optimizer cannot, like a compiler doesn't know the difference between the buy button and another button that is not that important in your website, right? That's something that just users, right? People using the website will tell the difference and the importance of it. So I really feel like, like getting the optimizer to do better heuristics is good, but the ultimate like solution is the other one, right? That's what you get to the best result.
Can I jump in here a little bit? So I want to point out that like Qwik is in this unique position, I think, where many things are possible, but like all the frameworks claim that many things are possible, right? Like, but Qwik's architecture actually is set up in such a way that things are actually possible, right? Because we have the ability to break up the source code into tiny pieces, then all of these tricks of like, recording data in Google Analytics and then bundling based on statistical information just becomes possible because, well, we can break things up, right? If you have a framework which can't break up your source code, which is most frameworks out there, then yeah, you could hook up analytics, but what are you going to do with that? It's not like you can influence the bundling system, etc. And so Qwik is in this kind of a interesting position, which I think most people don't realize, where like we might not do everything in the best possible way just yet today, but because of the underlying principles that we have, many things are very trivial or very easy or very straightforward to do or achieve, right? There aren't any like surprising roadblocks in front of us.
Okay, now's the time I want to get some questions in. That'll allow people to feel like it was a good use of time to ask questions in the first place. Make sure we're able to focus on the things people are asking for now. So I want to get through a few. We may have to go a little quickly because there's actually several really good ones asked. I'll start from the top. And I can give a quick answer on this. Let anybody throw in if I'm missing anything. But currently, to my knowledge, no. But Qwik should work fantastic with Storybook. And the number one thing we're looking for right now.
I think there was somebody in Discord who said that they got it to work, no?
Did they?
I
should
thought
post
I
it
heard
somewhere.
something.
Yeah, I don't think, we personally haven't tried it, but there's no technical limitations because, I mean, our REPL is working online. It's able to compile everything. And just so everyone knows, it's actually written in Rust and it uses WASM under the hood for it to work online. So there's no technical reason why we couldn't get Storybook to work because everything's all set up to be on a browser.
Yeah, I think the thing we're looking for is maybe somebody just do it and show it off. The biggest thing we're looking for is community contributions. As you can see, this team is small and the ambitions of Qwik are large, and the differences between existing frameworks are vast in some ways. So there's a lot of interesting sort of exploration research to do here. So John or somebody else, if you'd like to actually do an example implementation with Storybook and Qwik, I think people would love it. I think it's a perfect fit for Storybook. So I'm going to skip this one because there's a whole topic. We're going to come back to it. But here for signals, we want to dedicate a good chunk of time to signals because it's really, really interesting. And there's an incredibly key component to signals that is pretty different than you'll find in like Preact and Solid.js, but with the huge note that this is very inspired by Solid.js and the work Ryan does. So I want to make sure we don't forget that. But we will come back to this because that's a pretty in-depth topic. This one, is there a way to pick SSR or SSG per root? Do you have to pick one method for the whole app? So I know there's some cool work going on here. So Adam, you want to take a stab at this one?
This is perfect timing because like I actually have to implement this on our doc site because right now the doc site originally was just all SSR to make sure it worked in Cloudflare, and then we wanted complete SSG. So then I converted all the doc site to do SSG. So but now we have the issue where like a majority of the site can actually be SSG. Like it never changes per build, but the homepage is actually used as Builder, as it's an actual Builder product where anyone, any marketer, designer, you name it, can edit the homepage. But that needs to be able to rebuild itself. And so we have this exact same use case where it's a mixed match of both. And so yes, the short answer is absolutely. It's like it is a per route basis. And actually, chatting with the Cloudflare team, they showed me the neat, basically slick way of doing it of having to exclude config of saying like, don't use the functions for this path. So basically, or the opposite, or include, or like always use the functions for this path. And so it depends on your configuration. Whereas in our doc site, what I'm going to say is like, basically don't use SSR for everything except the homepage. That's what it's going to come down to. And so then the homepage will have the identical code of what it had before. It's just that now instead of building an index HTML file and pushing that to Cloudflare, it's going to then on every request, run the SSR and then cache that for however long we want, probably 10 minutes. And so absolutely, it's a per route decision. It's up to the developer to decide which routes those are. There's no reason why you can't have all SSR, all SSG. You can entirely control the cache headers of what you want to do. Basically, it's all in your control. And it's not just a Cloudflare thing, it's any server. So we've got middleware for Netlify, Express, Node, you name it.
And I just want to add, like, you can start with SSG on a particular route, and then the application can seamlessly become interactive and transition to like an SSR next page or something like that. So it's a complete mix and match.
I think it's too much because it will take too much time. But since we are this streaming is about beta and kind of the future of the roadmap, I want to say that one of the things we are in the team thinking about is SSR in general, which I think is going to be mind-blowing. I don't know. I just can't describe. We need to come up with a name for this. With everyone in the community, when we explain, someone come up with names about how we can describe this. But one of the ideas of one of the reasons why Qwik is that fast in the client is because it doesn't run code, right, until there's an interaction. That's why it's fast. It's why it's doing less, right? Because it resumes, right? The server pauses, and then the client resumes from that. But in SSR right now, we have kind of the problem that it doesn't resume, right? We have to boot up the application from zero, right? Like the application is empty. We have to run it all and send it in every single request. So kind of the idea we are thinking is that we can actually resume in SSR. And the kind of the fundamental idea is that we will kind of have some sort of dynamic pre-rendering where you will kind of render once, just like at build time. And every SSR request will be kind of waking up or resuming from that build state. And the nice thing about this is that maybe your application is mostly static, but there is one component in one part that renders the user personalization, right? So at SSR, that means that you can have a massive website with 100 components, but the SSR in the server is going to just execute one component and do that, and the rest is going to be like a string concatenation. So there's nothing like actually nothing run. And for a path that nothing is dynamic, then it's just like a string, and that's it, right? So I think that kind of also like the next big thing, which is going to get to the state of the art on performance, would be like a find replace. Like if you want to have the fastest SSR, it's like here's a string, right? Find replace a placeholder and put some user personalization. That's kind of the fastest you can get. I think we will get there, and you will still write applications like you do in Qwik, right? Not with doing hacks and find replace, just writing components. I think that can be huge.
Yeah, and as you described it, Mano, I think it just made me think that it's like resumability for the server. It's like, because we're able to, when we run SSG, that is the one-time run on a local machine. That's how we know that is the initial build. Like it has to start somewhere. But then on SSR, it's resuming of where you left off that initial one-time build a million times. And so we're able to skip through, like, so left menu, header, footer, everything that we know is never going to change. That's just a string. And so when you think of the JSX function for that, it's just like string, one little bit rendered string. And so it's going to be difficult to make it any faster than that, of just like, it's basically a huge string return with this, like Manu said, a find and replace of this one bit of data. And that's because the resumability of basically the SSG build from the first build locally.
Right. It's surprising, because resumability is always applied server to client, but it can be server to server, right? That's kind of the trick point there.
Yeah, and so people understand sort of the end goal here. I mean, a lot of what we talk about is we want to be able to deliver sort of Amazon.com scale and speed, but just easy. It just feels like the DX you're used to now. And so what do you see on Amazon.com? You see a lightning fast response that's unique to you as a individual. And obviously you could say, sure, I'll put my whatever framework at the edge. I don't know if you've done profiling, but rendering an entire application from scratch on a per visitor basis is very computationally expensive, very slow. It's not the best idea, even if all the data was pre-cached. So idea here definitely is like, okay, only this box is different per visitor, the name in the corner, whatever. So we should be able to have everything pre-generated and then just make the one tiny swap as needed in a simple sort of concatenation format. That's where, today the state of the art of personalization of kind of mainstream adoption outside of building an incredibly complicated bespoke setup is just doing the edge rewrites, right? So, okay, different path for you under the hood. So the homepage looks different for you versus you. But definitely, honestly, in my opinion, that only gets us part of the way there. It's better than everyone sees the same page, and it's better than doing all this stuff client side. But I think this is a really crazy next frontier for like extreme speed, extreme scale, extreme sort of hyper personalization, all, utilizing the edge to its full potential as well.
Yeah, and there was a tweet a couple months ago from an Amazon engineer basically saying like React SSR just basically isn't fast enough. And I can see why, at their scale where they got, billions of requests happening, if you have to render the entire tree for every user, like, yeah, that's going to be a challenge. So that's kind of what we're thinking about here.
I think that's the point is not to make it faster, because at a center and scale is like the talk ON, right? It's just scale. So even if it's very fast, like it's still like the bigger it grows, the slower it gets. So I think here you can get also this O1 SSR, right? Where it's not really one, but the n, instead of being the total size, is the amount of points. And someone pointed in the chat, like even for very dynamic sites, probably a low percentage is actually dynamic. I think it's true. I think even for a big site, like parts that actually need to change for every user are very small. So we can take advantage of that.
And that's the whole point. Like, they're absolutely right. There might be one, like, hello, Manu is going to be in the top right corner. If that's like the one dynamic thing, why are you having to re-render the entire tree for every single user? And so that's where, what we would generate is a massive string with like the one JSX function of just like, this is the name that you're supposed to put here. And so we can debate about how fast we can make renders. Qwik's rendering speed is at, pretty much pre-X speeds, so it's pretty good. But like making it slightly faster really doesn't move the needle. Like if you just don't render, that's what moves the needle of like performance.
How do you be fast? You do nothing. Nothing is very fast. So this is the right time, I think, to transition to signals, because I think a lot of what's going to give this potential is signals in Qwik. And it's important for people to understand that when we use the word, we use it in a slightly broader sense than you're maybe used to it, like with the Preact announcement. We love the Preact sort of like DX and design that was it Jason did. But I don't think that equating those two things is actually a proper comparison. So Manu, is this a good time to do a screen share on your side?
Yep.
Yeah, so let's, Manu, kick us off to explain to us signals in Qwik, and especially like the idea of resumable signals. It's a lot crazier than you think. It's not just patching a piece of DOM. It's not downloading the framework or components at all to update things in the client, which is, it's insane to me. I'll shut up.
So
font size.
So yeah,
big in font size.
Font size even bigger like this.
I think that's good.
Okay, so yeah, I want to emphasize everyone listening to pay attention here. Don't miss a bit, because I usually go fast on things. So it's just okay. So we have in this app, very simple app, we have one component, and this component creates a signal. And I want to say that in Qwik, signals are single value objects. So this means that this is pretty much the same as you store. Oops. Yeah, actually that. And saying, count 0. It's pretty much the same thing. In fact, count, we are getting the value here, and we to plus plus, and then we pass the value. So part of the building the signals for I think it's been more of the right way of how you will write templates in Qwik. It's kind of what we've been thinking a lot here. And I want to say that when you, in this component, right, it's taking some props. In this case, it's taking the count prop. You as a developer, you don't want to get a signal of a number, right? I don't know what the parent is going to give me. I just want a number, right? Like the concept. Like just think as a concept. Like component takes props. A prop can be a number, a string, an object, but conceptually is that, right? I need to take an account and a text. If I will do something like signal here of a number, then you are forcing the user of the component to say, now they cannot do just a simple number, right? Because now you have forced to kind of pass a signal. So let's go back. I'm going to run this app where we are declaring here, we are getting the value. Notice the console log. So this is when it renders here. Then we are passing the count. We are rendering here. Everything makes sense so far? I hope so. So we run this application. Here.
The only one thing people might value is not everybody might not even know what we mean by signal. Like, what are we even talking about in the first place? If you want to fill that in too.
Yeah. So signal, again, like I think at this point is it can mean a lot of different things in different frameworks. But for me, it means like the smallest unit of reactivity, right? So a signal is something that you can kind of pass around and consume at certain points, hopefully in the template. So you consume it in different points. And if you change the signal from the source, then it will propagate. And every places where the signal is being used is going to kind of rerun and re-render or do whatever. It's like a single unit, I will say.
I'm going to jump in a little bit.
Yeah.
The way I think about it is that, everybody knows what a value is, a number, right? 7 is a number. A signal of 7 would be not necessarily the number itself, but a function and this can come in a lot of different forms, but a function that can retrieve you the actual value, right? So the difference between the value and a signal is that value is the actual thing, whereas a signal is kind of like a function that allows you to retrieve the value. And the reason why this is important, this kind of a nuanced distinction, is that when you're passing things around, there's a difference of like getting a hold of the value itself and getting really just threading through saying like, you will have these kinds of numbers over the time, but you don't actually have to change the reference to your getter function. The getter function reference stays the same, but over time you will get different values in this particular location.
It's like maybe if there is some C or C++ developers, like a pointer, but reactive, right? You're not passing the actual value, you're passing the pointer to it, but it's reactive. So we have this demo, and I want to point out that here we render the child, here we render the parent, and what I'm going to show now is something that only Qwik can do, and I don't think any other framework can at this point. So you render, and if I click, what do you think is going to happen here? Steve, what do you think? Like, notice that we read the value here.
I mean, I could say if this was React, we get a ton of logs. A lot of things would re-render. If this was maybe something a little smarter, I think we would maybe get 2 logs. Parent and child might run again, for instance.
So I'm going to click, okay? I'm not cheating here. Nothing. What I mean with this is that all this code is removed from the browser. Like this code never download at all. Like it never has
to be clear. What you saw those logs there, those were not the logs that Manu had. These are logs from the development server.
Yeah. This is like internal logs from the thing. So but this not only means that
I'm going to be a devil's advocate to kind of drive the point home here, right? If I am a solid developer, I will say like, well, what do you mean? Like I have the same exact thing solid, right? Like when a variable updates itself, then the solid will surgically go in and update the DOM location. How is this different?
The thing is that this is still happening this way. So for example, if we run a performance benchmark, so in this demo, I actually have like 30,000 nodes here. If I measure, right, and I click, and I just stop. So let's see, this is actually development mode. So no, this is focusing, this is a different thing. So it's probably one of this one, right? So in the sense of solid, we are doing the same stuff here. We are updating that text node. The difference is that Qwik can do this without even having to download the template. That means that the rendering happening in the server, and it serializes enough information that when the value changes, we can go straight to that text node in the DOM, make the change, and that's it. We don't have to fetch anything. We don't have to VDOM anything, but again, the VDOM is not the important thing. The thing is that we are not downloading the component. So if this will be running like a, expensive function here. Oof. Anyway, you get the idea. That function or a dependency, whatever, that function will never be downloaded, right? And I think that's crazy.
Can I briefly add? I need to butt in just to make one thing clear. So with solid.js, you would see the initial logs. There's initial hydration, and you'll see those logs come the first time. Then when the value changes, you wouldn't see any logs thereafter. With Qwik, you never see any of those logs happen at all. It's very similar to what kind of one of our end goals here is to deliver just HTML. And when you need DOM updates, it's almost as if you had handwritten the tiniest vanilla JavaScript to make the update. No template, no framework, no diffing, no components. Exactly. It just doesn't exist.
Yeah, and what I was going to say, what's cool is like we've been talking about prefetching and getting the stuff you're going to need and things like that. With signals now, we can drastically reduce that even more of like, especially like when I think of the doc site and we've got the header component, and the header component would change which class is active or which link is active, and just all it does is change this class name. And then there's other with the left menu, all it did was just change one text node, things like that. So there's many cases at this today where we're downloading the entire component to re-render that function when you do it. Now there is a drastic difference of there's even less. We've been really happy with, like, we don't need to download a lot of bit of the code, but there's quite a bit less of code that we need to download now, because actually we're able to just like pinpoint, change a class name, change this text node, and it never downloads any of these functions. And so again, it's made a big difference of like even less being downloaded on Prefetch.
I think here interesting thing is that Qwik knows that in this particular demo, for example, that components will never be downloaded, right? So the prefetcher will not even prefetch it, right? I want to show a bit.
Sorry, I'm going to butt in here for a second. I just want to, at the risk of sounding like a broken record, I really want to make this clear, which is that any reactive framework, whether it's Solid, Svelte, etc., can do the demo you have just shown. The difference is that all existing reactive frameworks are required that they download the component and execute it at least once before all the magic can happen, right? And so the unique thing about Qwik is that we can make this reactivity happen without actually downloading any of the application code. Obviously, the framework gets downloaded, but zero application code is downloaded. Zero of the framework code is, or zero of the application code is actually downloaded to do this rendering, right? And that's the big, like, what the hell is happening? Like, how can you be running application without having the application be present?
Exactly.
Right. That's the like, what the hell?
This is just like a detail of how it works, but this is kind of the information that got serialized for this demo. And here, these two things are, let's say, like this will be like a serialization of the signal, and this is the value, which will be 0, right? And then this description is where the magic happens. So notice this, how do you call this? A hashtag? How do you call actually this symbol? I always forget.
Number sign, hashtag.
Hashtag. So the hashtag 4 actually refers to, this description is saying basically the first object, which is the signal, it has this description. And this description is a bit complicated to understand, but basically saying the data property of the element 4 is binded to this signal. And which one is that? Well, you go here, and we have this special thing to say, this is the text node, which is going to get the ID 4. And we have to put this these comments, because otherwise the browser will collapse the text, right? If you have two text nodes next to each other, they will collapse. The thing is that that's exactly what it's doing. That's the data, right? So if you get the thing here and you do data, you will get the 0. And you will see, it will update it to 1, and it will update to 1, right? That's exactly what the code is doing without executing it. And before maybe we go to other topic, is that you are not passing signals. For me, this is the biggest realization, is that I'm not doing count. In fact, I'm going to rewrite this demo and use a use store. I'm going to not call it value. I'm going to call it, I don't know, foo, right? And I'm going to put it 10. Now I'm going to put it onto store. So I'm going to store foo, and I'm going to pass a store foo, which is a number, right? And I'm going to just run this demo. So it's going to go here. I'm going to refresh. Hopefully works. 10, yeah. Render parent, render child. I'm going to click.
And when you show the in VS Code, the render parent, render child, that's coming from the server side of building the application.
Yes, but and again, notice here that I'm just getting a property here. I'm getting the value there, right? And it's not like a signal. It will actually work for every property of the use store, or for any kind of reactivity in Qwik, right? I really think that this is because when you are telling developers to pass the signal, it's kind of counterintuitive, right? People are not passing stores between components. That's kind of a weird API. People want to pass like primitives, like the value, like the concept of the value, right? So that's why kind of this big work we've been doing in signals is not about the use signal. It's about all these things. that makes sense. I don't know if.
Yeah, I think it's also like important. So a lot of this work is the improving the usability of how signals work, and specifically like if you have an external library, some other UI library that you want to pass data to, that shouldn't have to be required to know how to accept signals and know how to run signals internally. It should be entirely different. And so I think a lot of the work that Manu done is to make sure that this is entirely like it's a number or it's a string. That's how we think. That's how components accept things. That's how we pass things around. And so it's been really awesome to see it like come together like this, where it is quite simple at this point. And really, Manu, you didn't even really, I don't think we've showed enough of like how this is how it works really, really low level, but you're just writing a JSX function. You're just writing a normal component, and this is all just happening, so like, it's not like you need to understand or, write everything that Manu's been writing. It's still, you write a function and this is how you print out the value. So it's pretty simple yet.
Exactly. Even Steve got the demo wrong in the Twitter. Right, he posted like passing the signal, right, and yeah, like, but the thing is that might make sense to you because that otherwise it will not make a lot of sense. Right.
But I just thought it had to have constraints. You're gonna have to know what's a signal. You're passing a signal. You're accepting a signal. I was like, maybe it's worth the trade-offs. Until you just this morning showed like, no. You just write normal code. You don't think about it at all, and it just works. So yeah, my tweet was wrong, and it's better than expected.
This was a big inspiration. I read this blog post from Bowie. Is the framework? It's like it wrote like the Fabio. Is the creator of it. He wrote like a super glue blog post about this, comparing Bowie, which is the sort of framework, with Solid. And I feel like he was into making this how you can make Solid without the transformation that Solid has, and go very deep into it, like how we can possibly make JSX work like Solid, but without the tricks that Solid does at compiler time. And it's very cool, but at the same time, he is not realizing that he is putting the responsibility into the developer to write a lot of code that doesn't make a lot of sense. Like here, you have to put a function instead of passing the value directly. You have to put a function, okay? And I think it's kind of the realization that in Qwik we already put a lot of constraints, or like we already are fighting a battle in terms of you have to think about the serialization of data. Like there is already some cognitive load when you use Qwik. So kind of the realization is we don't want to put more into the template. You should write templates in the most naive way, and I think the most naive way is React. It's store.value. It's like, yeah, does it count, right? And I think we want to go that way.
Yeah, and even returning the JSX, it's just that function return JSX. Like there is no other little magic that we have to put inside of there to make sure that doesn't re-render. And so like if you're familiar with React, you're familiar with Qwik.
So maybe now's a good time. I had a question flagged way back. Maybe it's better to and this is a genuine question I have too. So this keeps coming up, RxJS and Qwik. And I'm actually genuinely curious, does this make sense? Is this an alternative reactive model you should use instead because the benefits we showed? Does it make sense to introduce a layer like RxJS or something similar, another state management system? Like, what are the trade-offs? I'm genuinely curious myself too.
I guess this is a question for me.
Or sorry, and this is actually, I didn't flag the perfect one. This is just saying, so insane it's hard, but somebody else asked, like, how do you do it? Should I do it? That's probably the better question here.
Okay. So I think the thing is, like, there are people who genuinely love reactivity, right? And I think Qwik is getting into that thing as well, saying like, look, signals are yet another form of reactivity. So reactivity is kind of the way of the future, and actually Qwik will not even work with reactivity, right? Qwik will kind of break, right? You can't have the thing that Qwik reactivity allows you to do is to be surgical about, like, I just need to update this one thing. And unless you have that form of surgical reactivity, the counter thing would be like, well, I don't know, re-render the whole thing. And when you say render the whole thing just kind of breaks. So reactivity is a must. And RxJS is just one way of doing reactivity, right? Other ways could be what Qwik has built in. Now, the big difference between all these different ways is that in order for us to be able to resume, we need to serialize the reactivity graph, right? And the problem with RxJS is that the reactivity graph that RxJS builds up internally to itself is, well, internal to itself. And so you can't really publish it, or you can't really see what's inside of it. You can't resume it. And so then on the client, you're just forced to execute all the code once to rebuild this reactivity. So it's not that we don't think RxJS is a good idea, or that we don't want to go RxJS or want to be a competitor to RxJS. It's just a fundamental property that in order to make all of these magic work, we need a way of serializing the reactivity graph, right? So we have to be intuitively, innately aware of what this graph is so that it can be serialized. And out of the box, RxJS just doesn't allow you to do that. Like, it's just some hidden graph somewhere that you have no access to. And as a result, you can't serialize, you can't rebuild it, and so on and so forth. So I think the answer is that, like, while in theory you can use RxJS with Qwik, it's going to be always in the form of like, well, you have to eagerly wake up your application, and then you have to build up the RxJS graph. And it's just like, yeah, but like, you're kind of going against the whole principle of what Qwik is. That the principle is that the reactivity graph should be built on a server, and then what's delivered to the client is just a graph and nothing else. And then you can just continue running where you left off. So my point of view on this thing is just use the primitives that Qwik gave you, because those primitives are well integrated and they're serialized and they have all of the right properties. And again, it's not to say like they were better than RxJS or anything like that. It's just that like we need this property, otherwise it is not resumable.
You could also say you wouldn't use RxJS with solid too, right? Like some frameworks just have reactivity built in, and it kind of, there's just no added benefit most likely. But sorry, Mondo, for cutting you off.
No, I think like I think there's still a way or a space for things like I'm not a fan of it, but things like Redux and things like this. So it's because these kind of things like are not about the reactivity, are about kind of the data flow, right? So a lot of this Redux, you can attach it, right? So you can kind of attach it to the reactivity is done by uStore, and Redux like does the change mutations and like they organize your logic. I kind of see that more. Even in Solid, there's example of using Solid Redux,
but I think
you're still based on the Solid reactivity.
But like the difference I think is that Solid is not resumable, right? And because of that, there is no cost, like there is no negative impact to just like, well, when you wake up, when you hydrate, you rebuild the graph. That's perfectly fine. But in Qwik, that's not the case, right?
But I think Redux, you can have the actions, you could have an actions lazy loaded. You know, you kind of, because you cut the action, but it doesn't.
Sorry, I was answering the RxJS. Like people use RxJS with Solid, right? When you have things like Redux, which is serializable, at least in theory, I don't know the details, I haven't tried it, like that's a more likely thing that yes, you could probably use that, right? The requirement is really, can it be serialized in a way so that I don't have to eagerly run code on the client, right? That's the only requirement.
So the one thing in this category I'm genuinely interested in, I wonder, I have a feeling it'll come up in the future, but probably not necessarily soon. So we use for the builder full drag and drop visual CMS application, the kind of Figma-like tool that you can use, because it was born before Qwik, we use React and MobX. It's pretty obvious. I've always been a fan of SolidJS style reactivity. This is before I knew about SolidJS as well, or probably might have made it with SolidJS, or if Qwik existed, Qwik. But we don't just use MobX only, right? We actually use MobX state tree, which I think is fantastic. It adds structure on top of the reactivity, and it gives you a lot of additional benefits. And that's something that'll be interesting when you think a bit like domain or schema modeling and the relationships between things in a slightly more a lot like you would design sort of database, sort of relational data relationships. It's really, really nice. And so I do actually think there's an interesting opportunity here to build additional things on top of the primitives, the reactive primitives in Qwik. I know like XState and state machines are really interesting as well. I'm going to have David on this stream next week to talk about that. But I do think there's some interesting things. We'll see what it's like to bring your own state management alongside Qwik, again, because of the sort of benefits of the built-in system. You're going to want to keep those, but building on top of those, I think, will be an interesting thing for the community to explore over time, and us to see, large applications, what the best sort of abstractions are. we can. Sorry, Matt, do you want to add something? Or I can jump into. We had a couple
No.
more questions here.
Yeah, I will say like there's a lot of questions.
Yeah, exactly. I've starred some, so why don't we go through a couple more? Here's let's see. Okay, we have a bunch. We can go over and try and get to as many as we can. I'm sure I missed some. We've answered this one a bunch of times, so I'm just going to mention it briefly. That this comes up on Twitter a lot, but anybody who watches the stream instead of Twitter. So, Qwik syntax looks like React because we did not want to build yet another templating system. We just had, if you didn't catch it, Dylan Piercy, who was on the Marco team, was on the stream last week talking about the insane amount of work it is to create DSLs and all the tooling for all the IDEs, and they are just constantly having to put a lot of time and effort into that. And specifically with Qwik, we wanted to not have to do that, focus on what makes Qwik unique, and to get all the tooling and TypeScript support and this stuff out of the box. So yeah, it uses JSX. Could there be other ways to have other templating? I guess in the future. We're not married to JSX. We are just really focused on making sure we deliver what's unique and not reinventing the wheel in terms of tooling. Let me go, let's see.
In fact, we didn't even have our own CLI, right? So in the beginning we were like, we are going to use Byte. We are going to, we have Adam and I the experience of building the whole CLI and the whole build process for everything with Stencil. And it was like droning on things and fixes, and always there's some library that doesn't work. And it was also one of the things like let's build on top of someone that feels this problem for us.
Yeah, and the other thing I think is the file extension. I think we were adamant from the very beginning is like, TSX only allowed because then we get all of the magical tooling out of the box. TypeScript, Babel, everything, you name it, is like it's done for us. And so that I think has been a good decision so far.
Yeah, exactly. And in theory, you could write compilers to anything too. I mean, one interesting thing happening now is people are writing different syntaxes for mitosis, because mitosis works like LLVM. You can have as many front-end languages like what you write, and mitosis compiles to Qwik. So theoretically, you could actually use a svelte syntax with Qwik using mitosis as the intermediate. So something to think about. Yeah, it's kind of neat in my opinion. So there's options. We're not trying to lock you in anything. We're just trying to build the best possible thing with the kind of team that we have. Here's an interesting one. This has come up before, but is there a way to integrate dynamic SSR routes with a PWA service worker? You could maybe interpret that a couple ways. I think I know what it means. I think, Adam, you might have an answer if you feel confident in your interpretation of the question.
Is that like, my guess is you want to have an offline site and it has different web pages, and you like, how do you get all the offline PWA?
Yeah, maybe we could. I'm guessing it's either that, or maybe it's talking about using the service worker to do the SSR. So you're like passing HTML over to the main thread. That's where I'm like, there could be different interpretations. Manu, maybe.
I want to say that the service worker that we provide is in the starter, right? So we have the entry point for the service worker. If you see in the routes, it's actually at the main route, the service worker TS. And this, and then there you will see that it imports kind of the active prefetching logic for Qwik. But you can, if you using already service workers for other things, right, or like casual for site double steal, you have control of your service worker, right? We don't take it from you.
Yeah, Qwik City provides the source of service worker. Your code in the starters imports the stuff that does the prefetching, but you absolutely have 110% control of what happens to that service worker. You can even rename it, put it somewhere else. We just have the starters of kind of where we suggest it should go first. But yeah, as far as like PWA, if I was going to interpret it as for offline, that's one option that I think we can quite easily add to our service worker, is to just prefetch everything for in the
super
case
eager.
That,
super hungry, extra active. Just
do it, and so right now we're doing the work to not do that, but to just blow through all of them. That's quite simple that we can add.
That's actually hilarious. Yeah. So you can have that's actually kind of fascinating. You can truly be streaming an entire application to the point where your network cuts off and you can use the whole application. Actually, there's two interesting things here. One is just reemphasis of the points that Qwik is just a new set of primitives, which just allows us to do new things. And in our experience so far, it's not taking away anything or anything significant from the way you're currently doing things. So a lot of doors get open. So one thing people had brought up, if they didn't quite understand the buffering, the active streaming or active prefetching model of Qwik, so like, oh, what about latency? You know, what if I have an unstable network connection? I download the first page and then, you know, I don't know, I'm driving, my train goes under a tunnel, a long one. You're taking the BART under the bay. It takes like 15 minutes or something. And if you think of Qwik wrong, you might think, oh, interaction won't work. But actually, the opposite is true. You actually, unlike most applications, could be prefetching an insane amount. You could be actually actively using that thing offline pretty in depth if we add that sort of extra eager fetching mode. Or in the current model, most likely you still won't notice any networking issues either, because it'll just fetch the right amount, and the same sort of paths would work in any other kind of application model.
Yeah, and usually the argument is like, well, what if this happens and this happens, like, well, it wouldn't work in every scenario. You know, like no matter name, it's a website, it's connected. You know, if you don't have connectivity, you know, it's not going to work. What's different here is that, you know, we prefetch, you know, only the possibilities, but then also like we didn't have to prefetch the 200 kilobytes of the framework, right? So we already skipped over a large chunk of what's not needed. And we've already bundled, you know, these are all the things you're probably going to use. And so like that, it skips over so much more, but then it, you know, it still falls on the same problems of like, well, if you don't have internet, it's not going to work. But we do have, you know, using the cache API. Whereas if you're using link rel preload, that's not going to guarantee that is going to be, you know, working offline. And then you have to also have a service worker, whereas we kind of solved it with the service worker.
So here's what I'll throw in. I think it's a great question from Shai. What would we like to see from the community in the period before 1.0? So I have an answer, and anybody else jump in. I'm sure there's many things. I mean, one of the biggest things we want to see is people building things with Qwik and giving us feedback about the process. What went well, what didn't go well. Show other people what you built. Like the whole hypothesis here, and we've proven it out in a number of places, but nothing is real proof like large-scale production usage, is show us how much better the performance can be. We already got, I mean, I didn't even see, I think it's called IMG, that modeling agency, which apparently is a huge one. We didn't even realize. Move their homepage Qwik. Of course, it's insanely fast. It's beautifully interactive too, but we want to see sort of more things, more feedback, more contributions, contribute to core. There was a question here also about Manu gave this masterclass, just a deep dive on how Qwik works internally and how to understand and contribute, which we will post online soon. We have it recorded, so we'll post that for people who want to see it. There's a bunch of questions about that, so that's coming. But I'll shut up. What else would the team here like to see from the community?
I'm going to add education. I think it's a big thing, right? Like Qwik is different, like significantly different. It's a mental model shift that has to occur. And the problem is, if we're running around, we as in the core team members running around and saying, it's different, it's awesome, blah, 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 everybody discounts it. Nobody believes that, right? Whereas if community shares and says like, oh, I tried it. It really is different. Here is what I've learned. Let me give you my experience, right? It's a very, very different message. So I think content and education, whether it's content in the form of blog posts, YouTube, Twitter, or anything like that, like getting the word out to explain to people like, this is fundamentally different. This is a fundamental innovation, something that isn't available with other frameworks, right? And I think that's a big thing. The mass, the community, the software developer community that do front end development really needs to be re-educated and saying like, there is a different approach. And this resumability is not just a marketing buzzword, but like it is a fundamental rethink of how to approach the problem space.
Yeah, and I think to extend that topic on education, something that where the doc site's really lacking is just diagrams. I would love, I think it makes so much more sense. You can draw it like, this happens, an arrow here, you know, and it just makes so much more clear, you know, picture's worth 1,000 words type of thing. We're not designers. We're not really good at this, you know, visual stuff. So any help we can get there is like, actually made a lot of sense if you pictured it like this. So like any help with ideas of how to do diagrams, you know, I'd love to see that added to the doc site.
For me, also is related to content. I would like to, and I think from the core team also needs to come an effort now to have more distributed the docs and the starters and everything. I think one of the things that in Qwik, I think one of the actually the core things in Qwik is that we don't want to create a closed ecosystem, right? We want to say you can use all the Vite plugins. If you want to use Tailwinds, you can. If you want to use to a certain point, right? Maybe the state management is kind of more where we need more work. But for a lot of things, I feel like one of the most exciting things about Qwik is to have quick React integrations with all the cloud starters, have a very beautiful showcase pages like Astro has, and they do such a good job on that. I feel like today's in today's world, all the the biggest open source project, they need to integrate. I think integrations are key. So I would like to have before 1.0 like a ton of integration, right? Testing, all sorts of things, like be like npm. Adam did the first steps with it, like npm run quick at, right? And then you X, right? And it can be Tailwinds, it can be React, it can be integration with Angular, so we can have Angular components inside. All these things, I think, for 1.0, and like a beautiful docs and showcase, and in the docs will be
Yeah, and like to go off that, like we talked about, we didn't want to build a CLI. I think what's different here is that it really is just simplifying, like merging, like, well, you need to add this to your package JSON, and we need to add this to your Vite config. That's all that the Qwik CLI does. But we're still using Vite, which actually uses rollup, which is extremely standard. So we're not having to reinvent of how to add plugins. We're not having to reinvent this whole system of like some adapter system to get things to work. It's really just like using Vite and rollup for the most part.
I want to say that Leifer, one of the comments, he said at Partytown, and he built the Partytown integration, and he actually started using it in his app. And then I told him to if he could do the feature, and he did. So more of these kind of things will be super cool.
Yeah, we might be getting ahead of ourselves, but it was really cool to see, like, when Solid.js did a hackathon, a bunch of people made ecosystem things, extensions, libraries, components, this and that. So those things in general are a huge value. Both give us the feedback on how the process went and how you feel about it and where areas we can improve. But if we want people to, I think much of the world, especially of those like, talking to Dylan last week, and some of these very large companies we talked to as well, but others, there's like Alex Russell and stuff too. There are some people who are becoming more and more aware of the problems with how we utilize heavy duty JavaScript in the browsers today. Right. In fact, just the other day, I was trying to open up a few charts. And in my head, I was like, yeah, just SVG charts, just command click, open a bunch of charts and new tabs. It'll be fine. My computer almost crashed because I just can't open 5 charts because it's, it's a website that's built with heavy duty hydration, and just you can't treat these things like documents. Or even better, obviously, what Qwik is after, which is like load as a document, continue almost like in single page app, but more lightweight across the board. And so if we want to bring that world about, if you want to make it so that when you're opening charts by other people, they're using newer techniques and your usage of their products runs faster, or just websites in general, mobile sites just get faster, people need to adopt Qwik or similar frameworks, Marco, etc. In order to do that, you need ecosystem. You need installable components. You need those, npm run quick add, things. So contributions there really help a lot to get other people started, and to show kind of what's possible and show that, yeah, this is a new thing that's also very familiar. So all that stuff helps a ton. We are a bit over. I think we covered a lot of the really critical questions. I think we can, for now, if anybody wants to continue chatting, we are in Discord. Discord's gotten busy, but we are in there observing, answering, and we have a lot of other people who know the framework really well that can sort of answer questions to help too. There's also GitHub Issues. Mario, you want to say something?
No, I was seeing some like quick. Maybe you can just respond to some of the quick issues as signals, because I feel like they can be super quick. One of them is the use store and use signal. If it's a syntax sugar, they behave the same, but use signal is more efficient. So use store is a proxy. Use signal is just like it's simpler, right? So it's not built on top, but from the outside they behave very much the same. And then also Sai mentions that if you pass values, why do you need signals? Well, actually, the reactivity is still done by the store or the signal, right? You are not passing a number. There is something going on there. And there is another one that says the magic. So I want to emphasize on this one because it's the Oren. It's less magic in a way. So Qwik already introduces a lot of magic. So I agree. for the thing with the dollar is a magic there. The kind of magic we are doing for signals is a perfectly local compiler transform. That means that we don't need to look at other symbols. We don't need to look at the type information. We don't need to look anywhere. Just by looking at the EST, we can make a transform that will not break. So it's a perfectly safe optimization, let's say. So it's not something that, like if you call it differently, or you like put in a different file, or you import something that is not supposed to be a store, it will break. That's not the case. So in that sense, I feel like, yeah, we are doing this kind of transform with optimizer, but a lot of them like are not like in this belt case where you cannot have composability. You take like a different trade-off. You go very far into the reactivity with the optimizer that you cannot have anymore, your own hooks or your own function that are reactive. So in that sense, I think we are in as everything is a trade-off. We are trying to be like in that point.
I think at this point, like what you described, it reminds me of just like JSX in general. It's an abstraction, but it ends up making a H function with the first tag. Same idea. It's like it's very local to that one exact object. The other thing I want to really quickly plug, I know we're over time, is the new media page. So if you go to the Qwik site, in the header, there's a link called media. It has all the videos and talks and blogs that we have out there. It's only the ones that I've kind of have top of my head that I found. So please feel free to submit a PR. It should be pretty simple. Greg was awesome at redesigning it a little bit to make it even easier to contribute to. So yeah, if there's something missing, if you created a blog or you created a video, please submit a PR and we'll add it to the site.
Awesome. Well, you all can catch us in Discord. We'd love to see what you build, how you want to contribute this and that. We'll keep providing education, help, again, limited team here, but we have a lot of others who are growing to know the framework really well that can sort of help us scale this effort. Thank you all for joining. This was a ton of fun. Next week, we'll have David of XState talking about sort of this whole world of, we kind of want to draw some comparisons between sort of XState and Stately and sort of Qwik and build this idea of visualizing your components, your software, your state, and how this benefits both the developer, other team members, and stuff like that. So that'll be really fun. I mean, this guy makes amazing content, has amazing sort of point of view and things to share. We'll be back with more Qwik content in future weeks as well. Keep contributing, keep jumping in our Discord, and would love to see what you build. Adam,
Greg, I meant Glenn. I just realized. Glenn. Sorry, Glenn.
Glenn is amazing. Well, he said he can't catch the live stream anyway. Maybe he'll watch it afterwards.
Yes. Sorry about
that. Yeah, Glenn kills. We have a few other like really top contributors too that we'll keep kind of like showcasing and raving about. But anyway, we'll catch you all next time. Thank you so much for joining, and I'll see you later.